All right, let's dive in. Today, we're exploring something we all have a connection with: food.
It's more than just what's on the plate, right?
Exactly. We're going beyond that. I found this really cool podcast, and it got me thinking about food as a cultural thing, a scientific thing, even like personal memories and those weird food things we all do.
Food is definitely more than just fuel, that's for sure.
Totally. It's like a universal language, kind of. The podcast started with how food is tied to different cultures. They mentioned Italian food, and it's not just about the taste. There's this whole feeling of celebration, of joy.
It's like each bite is part of something bigger.
Why do you think that is with Italian food? What makes it feel so celebratory?
Well, they really emphasize family and community,
Mhm.
right? And shared meals. So the food, it's like an extension of that. Long meals, fresh ingredients, and those recipes, the ones passed down, it all adds to that feeling.
It's like those values are baked right in. Then they talked about Japanese sushi, which is so different. It's all about simplicity and like mastering the technique over years and years.
Yes, sushi is a perfect example of how culture shapes the food. The
Mm.
minimalist look, the fresh seasonal stuff, the attention to
It's
detail.
like every tiny detail matters.
It reflects Japanese culture in a really deep way.
It's amazing that even a sushi roll can have so much cultural meaning packed into it. The podcast also talked about Ethiopian food and how sharing from a communal platter is a huge part of the experience.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example of food bringing people together. They use this bread, injera, to scoop the food from the platter. It's like a symbol of that connection.
It's not just about the eating, it's more like a ritual, a social thing.
Yeah, exactly. It reinforces the community aspect.
It reminds me of those big holiday meals we have, like Thanksgiving here or Lunar New Year feasts in China. The food is the center of everything and it brings everyone together.
Totally. Food creates traditions, memories, and connects us to, like, our families, our culture, even our past.
It's way more than just fuel. It's social. It nourishes relationships.
It really does. Even something simple like grabbing coffee with a friend.
It's more than just the caffeine. It's about that shared moment.
Exactly. Food gives us a reason to connect, to talk, to share experiences. The podcast also got a bit more personal. The hosts talked about comfort foods.
Yeah, one of them was all about mac and cheese for that cozy feeling. I get that. Mac
Yeah.
and cheese just screams comfort food.
It's interesting how specific dishes can be so emotionally powerful.
Mm.
The other host was all about a big bowl of ramen, the real deal, not the instant stuff.
Nothing beats a good bowl of ramen.
I actually called it a hug in a bowl.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Ramen has that soul-soothing quality.
It really does. What about you? What would you say is your comfort food? What is it about it that makes you feel good?
Tough question. I think for me, it's my grandma's chicken pot pie. It's not just the taste, though that's amazing. It's the whole thing, the smells, the memories. It's tied to my childhood.
It's like food can take you back in time.
It totally can. It connects you to people and those happy memories.
Absolutely. Speaking of personal experiences with food, the podcast hosts talked about some of their, well, quirks.
Oh, yeah, this is where things got interesting. One of them said they eat pizza with a fork and knife. To avoid getting messy fingers. I kind of get it, but isn't that like missing the point of pizza?
That's no right. Seems almost wrong. But it shows how we relate to food. It's not just taste. It's rituals, habits, even our own little weird things.
And then the other host said they dip their French fries in ice cream. Sweet and salty, I guess.
Now, that's a little adventurous, even for me. But hey, everyone's got their thing right. It shows there's no right or wrong way to enjoy food.
It's all about what makes you happy. After those personal food quirks, the podcast moved on to cooking, like the first time you try to cook something and it totally flops.
They shared some pretty relatable stories, starting with burnt scrambled eggs.
And flat pancakes because they forgot the baking powder. I think we've all been there.
Oh, for sure. It reminds you that everyone starts somewhere. Even the best chefs had to learn the basics, often by messing up along the way.
I love that they didn't let those kitchen fails stop them. They actually kept experimenting. One got into making homemade pasta, the other got into baking.
Those early mishaps can spark a lifelong love of cooking. It's not about being perfect right away. It's about trying, learning from mistakes, pushing yourself to try new things. What do you think about that idea? Embracing those mistakes.
I think it's key to remember that cooking is a skill. Like any skill, it takes time and practice. It's okay to make mistakes, to burn things, overcook things. The more you experiment, the better you get.
That's a great way to put it. It's about the journey and finding the fun in the process, even when things go wrong. Speaking of new and exciting things, the podcast then talked about global food trends, which I find really fascinating.
Totally. They talked about the rise of plant-based eating. It's everywhere these days. Even fast food places have vegan burgers, oat milk lattes.
It's not just a trend anymore, it's becoming mainstream.
Why do you think that is? What's driving it?
I think it's a bunch of things. Some people are focused on health. Others, they're concerned about animal welfare or the environment. And some people, they just want to try new things and new flavors.
And then there's fusion food. It's like taking the best parts of different food traditions and mixing them up to make something totally new.
It's creative for sure. They mentioned things like sushi tacos, kimchi quesadillas.
I don't know how I feel about those combos, but the creativity is impressive.
I agree. Fusion is all about innovation in the kitchen. But it's got to be done well. Otherwise, it just feels like a gimmick.
Right. Where's the line between creative and just throwing random ingredients together?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think to do it well, you need to really understand and respect the different food traditions you're blending. It's about finding those flavors that work well together, to create something that feels both new and familiar at the same time.
Speaking of new and exciting, one trend they talked about was food photography. Everyone's a food blogger these days. Social media is full of perfectly plated dishes.
Social media has totally changed how we see food. It's as much about the visuals now as the taste.
It makes you wonder, does a beautifully photographed dish taste better?
That's a great question. We do eat with our eyes first, right? So maybe presentation does affect how we taste things. Or maybe it's all hype. Maybe we're all just falling for this perfect image.
It's something to think about for sure.
It makes you wonder how much of what we enjoy about food is beyond the actual taste. But speaking of talking about food, the next part of the podcast looked at the link between food and language.
I loved that part. They talked about how we use food metaphors all the time. Spill the beans, piece of cake. I never really thought about it before, but it's so true.
Right. These phrases, they come from our experience with food, and they're such a big part of how we talk. There's a cool example from French, avoir la pêche, which means to feel great, but it literally translates to have the peach.
That's a good one. The way we talk about food says so much about our relationship with it and how that's different in different cultures.
Language really reflects a culture's history, their traditions, how they see the world, and the fact that food is so important in language, that tells you a lot.
Okay, get ready for this next part because this is where things got really, heartwarming. They started talking about food and memories, and it was emotional.
Priest effect, right. A taste, a smell, and suddenly you're transported back in time.
One of the hosts talked about their grandma's chicken stew. They said even a whiff of something similar could take them right back to her kitchen, to those feelings of love and warmth.
It's amazing how powerful those senses are. The other host, it was the smell of ripe mangoes that brought back memories of family trips to pick mangoes.
It's like food is a time machine.
It connects us to our past, to the people who've shaped us.
It's not just about the taste, it's about the experience, who you shared it with, the emotions you felt.
It makes food more than just food. It's a story about memories, emotions, and the people in your life.
That's a great way to put it. But speaking of stories, are you ready for an adventure?
Hit me with it.
Well, the podcast then went on to talk about those weird and wonderful foods you find around the world, and they did not disappoint. One host talked about trying fried insects in Thailand.
Fried insects. Wow. That's stepping outside the comfort zone. What did they say?
They were actually into it. They said they were crunchy, kind of nutty like roasted peanuts. They even said they'd try them again.
That's impressive. I admire their adventurous spirit.
Me too. It shows how curious we are, how willing we are to experience other cultures through their food.
Totally. It's about being open to things we might not usually consider food. And then the other host tried durian fruit in Malaysia.
Oh, durian, the one that smells awful, like old gym socks.
Yeah, something like that. It's famous for its smell. Some hate it, some love it, and the taste is just as intense. Some say it's creamy, like custard. Others say it's like old cheese or gasoline.
I think I'll pass.
Probably a good choice. But it's fascinating how something that's a delicacy in one culture can be, well, repulsive to another.
It shows how subjective taste is and how our culture shapes what we like. They also mentioned some other interesting ones, like fermented shark from Iceland and Eskimos, which are ant larvae from Mexico.
Eskimos are considered a delicacy in Mexico. They call them insect caviar sometimes. Apparently they're buttery and usually cooked with, well, butter and spices.
Insects caviar. Wow. It just shows you how diverse food cultures are around the world, how food reflects the environment, the culture.
It really speaks to how resourceful and adaptable we are as humans. But after that whirlwind tour of global cuisines, the podcast went into the science of taste.
I love that stuff. I think it's so cool to understand what's happening biologically, chemically, when we taste things. What did they talk about?
They started with the basics: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, the 5 primary tastes.
Okay, we all know those. Did they go deeper than that?
They did. They talk about how smell is a big part of how we taste things. Some experts think up to 80% of what we perceive as taste actually comes from our sense of smell.
Whoa, really? That much?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. When you eat, molecules from the food travel up to the back of your nose. That's where those olfactory receptors are. And that information from your nose combines with the signals from your taste buds. That's how you get those complex flavors.
That makes so much sense. No wonder food tastes bland when you have a cold.
Exactly. You're missing that crucial smell component. They also talked about how our taste preferences change as we get older.
Really? How so?
Well, think about kids. They often hate bitter foods, but they start to like them more as they get older, like coffee or dark chocolate.
Interesting. So is that because our biology changes?
Partly, yes. Our taste buds and those smell receptors change over time. But it's also about what we're exposed to and what we learn to like.
So it's not just biology, it's our experiences too.
Right. And they mentioned this really interesting thing. Positive memories tied to a food can make you enjoy it more. It's like the nostalgia factor.
Oh, yeah. Certain foods just make you feel good because you associate them with happy memories.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a cool mix of psychology and food. The power of those memories can be strong. It can make food taste even better because it brings back those feelings of comfort, happiness, connection.
Okay, now let's talk pop culture. The podcast went into how food shows up in movies, TV shows, books, everything.
Love this topic. Food becomes more than just food. It's a way to connect with those shared experiences and emotions.
They mentioned iconic scenes like Lady and the Tramp sharing spaghetti or the butterbeer from Harry Potter. Who hasn't wanted to try butterbeer?
Right. Those images are so strong. And it's not just fictional food. They talked about the popularity of food reality shows like MasterChef and The Great British Bake Off.
Those shows are so inspiring. Seeing those talented home cooks create amazing things, it makes you want to get in the kitchen and try something new.
They've definitely made food feel more like an art form and inspired people to be more adventurous cooks.
And they talked about how food is used in literature, how authors use really vivid descriptions of food to pull readers into the story.
It's a powerful tool. Even a simple description of a character's favorite meal can tell you a lot about them, their personality, background, their social status. Food adds so much to a story.
Okay, well, after all that food for thought, I'm feeling pretty inspired. Did they give any advice for, expanding our culinary horizon, like practical stuff?
They did. They recommended starting small. Try a new ingredient each week or a new recipe just to ease yourself into new flavors and different types of food.
Baby steps.
Exactly. And they said to visit local markets, which is a great idea.
Oh, yeah, markets are amazing. You can talk to the vendors, find out where the food comes from, discover new things.
Right. And they really emphasize talking to the vendors, asking questions. It's not just about buying the food. It's about learning the story behind it, where it comes from, who grew it.
Connecting with the people and the culture behind the food. That adds a whole other level to it.
Absolutely. Food isn't just something we eat. It's a whole cultural tapestry. It's about traditions, stories, and human connections.
Well, that brings us to the end of part 1 of our food exploration.
We've covered a lot of ground. From cultural influences to personal quirks, we've really delved into the world of food.
I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for it. But before we move on to part 2, where we'll explore even more about food sustainability, the psychology of food, all that, we have a question for you to think about. If you could only eat one type of cuisine for the rest of your life, what would it be and why? Think about it, and we'll discuss it in part 2. Welcome back. That was a tough question you left us with before the break.
The one cuisine dilemma.
Yeah. If you could only eat one type of cuisine for the rest of your life, what would it be? I've been thinking about it, and I'm still not sure. Maybe Italian, because there's so much variety. But then I'd miss those bold flavors in Thai food.
So many delicious choices. It's a great problem to have, right? For me, I think I'd go with Indian food. All of the amazing spices, so many vegetarian options, and incredible meat dishes too.
Ooh, good choice. Okay, let's get back to that podcast we were talking about. They ended on a really important topic: food and sustainability.
It's more important than ever these days, especially with climate change and the growing population.
For sure. They talked about things we can all do to make better choices, like wasting less food, being aware of portion sizes, composting.
Those are all great starting points. They also talked about choosing seasonal produce, which is better for the environment and usually tastes better too.
So true. There's nothing like a ripe tomato in the summer. They also talked about supporting local farmers, going to farmers markets, things like that.
It's a win-win. You're supporting your community and getting fresh, high-quality food.
They mentioned sustainable seafood choices, which can be confusing.
Definitely. So many labels and certifications, it's hard to know what to trust. They recommended checking out the Monterey Bay Aquarium's Seafood Watch Guide. It gives recommendations based on science.
Good tip. I'll have to check that out. And lastly, they encouraged people to cut back on processed foods.
Processed foods are usually not that healthy,
Yeah.
and they have a big impact on the environment.
So it's about making those small changes to eat more whole, unprocessed foods.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect, it's about progress.
And all those small changes add up for our health and the planet. Speaking of healthy choices, did the podcast talk about the psychology of food at all?
They did. They talked about emotional eating.
Oh, I know that one. Stressful day, reach for the ice cream.
Totally normal. But the key is to be aware of those triggers, right? And find healthier ways to cope.
Instead of using food for comfort, maybe go for a walk, talk to a friend.
Exactly. Find something that helps you deal with stress that isn't food. They also talked about mindful eating, paying attention to when you're hungry and when you're full.
Isn't that about slowing down, really savoring each bite, being present while you're eating?
That's it. It's the opposite of eating while you're distracted, scrolling on your phone, watching TV. Mindful eating is about really experiencing your food, the taste, the textures.
It sounds simple, but it's hard to do sometimes.
It takes practice, but it can really help you develop a better relationship with food. It can help your digestion and even make you enjoy your food more.
I'm going to try to be more mindful at my next meal. Did the podcast mention any interesting research or anything like that?
It did. There was a study about the power of food rituals.
Food ritual.
Yeah, like always using a certain plate for your cereal in the morning or having a dedicated pizza night every week.
Interesting. What's that got to do with food?
Well, it turns out those little rituals can actually make you enjoy your food more.
Real.
The researchers think it's about creating anticipation and predictability.
So you get excited about it.
Exactly. And it's not just personal rituals. They also talk about the cultural rituals around food, the Japanese tea ceremony or Thanksgiving dinner, for example.
It's not just eating. Those rituals have meaning, tradition.
They create special moments and shared experiences, and food is the center of it all.
Okay, well, now I want to create some new food rituals. Speaking of, did they give any advice for, like, social situations and food? You know, when someone offers you something you really don't want to eat?
They did. They said to always be polite and thankful, even if you don't like the food.
Makes sense. It's about respecting the person who made it.
Yeah. And they said to focus on saying something positive, like compliment the presentation.
Instead of saying, this tastes bad, you can say, wow, this looks so nice.
Right. Find a way to be appreciative without, lying. They also gave some phrases for politely saying no, like, I'm actually really full right now, or I already ate, but thank you.
Those are good to have in your back pocket. Okay, so remember that question you asked earlier about what cuisine we'd choose if we could only have one? What did you decide?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. I think I'm going to go with Mediterranean. It's so fresh and healthy. Lots of fruits and veggies, whole grains, lean protein, healthy fats.
Ooh, that's a good one. I love Mediterranean food. It's so flavorful. It just makes you feel good.
And it's so diverse, right? With influences from so many different countries.
So we talked about food rituals, mindful eating, handling social situations. What else did they cover?
Well, they ended on a really thought-provoking question. They asked, what is your personal food philosophy?
Okay, that's deep. What does that even mean?
It's about thinking about your values and beliefs when it comes to food. What are your priorities? Is it health, pleasure, connection with others, sustainability?
It's about thinking beyond just what you eat. It's the why behind it.
Exactly. It's about being intentional with food, finding something that aligns with what you believe in. So what's your food philosophy?
I think for me, it's about balance. Eating healthy, but also enjoying treats and trying to be aware of my impact on the environment.
That's great. It's about finding that sweet spot. Well, that was quite a journey through the world of food. We covered a lot. from sustainability to the psychology of food.
I feel like I've learned so much.
It's amazing how much there is to learn about food. It's a reflection of who we are. But before we wrap things up, one last question for you to think about. What's one food that you used to hate but now you love?
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of food. Before the break, we were talking about how our tastes can change over time. You know, those foods we might have hated as kids, but now we kind of like them.
Our palates are definitely always evolving. Our experiences shape what we like, the flavors we're exposed to. It's pretty cool when you think about it.
It makes you think twice before you say you don't like something, right? Because maybe later on, you'll actually love it.
Yeah, it's like, don't close yourself off to anything. You never know what you might end up loving.
I totally agree. Like for me, it was Brussels sprouts. As a kid, hated them, the worst vegetable ever. But now I love them. Roasted with some balsamic glaze, some pecans.
It's amazing how a different way of cooking can change everything.
It's like a whole new food. It shows how much more goes into what we like than just the taste, you know, how it's cooked, what it smells like, who you're eating with.
It all affects the experience, and that changes how much you enjoy it.
So true. It's not just about the food on its own, it's the whole package. Before the break, you asked us about a food we disliked before but love now. Did you think of one?
I did. For me, it's olives. Hated them as a kid. Way too bitter and salty. But as I've gotten older, I've started to appreciate that salty, briny flavor. Now I can't get enough of them, especially the Kalamata ones.
I love those. It just shows that you never know how your tastes will change. It's cool that we can keep discovering new things, even when it comes to something as basic as food.
Totally. It's like a reminder to keep exploring, to be open to trying new things, and to accept that our tastes change. Throughout this deep dive, we've talked about food and culture, food and science. But now I want to bring it back to something more personal. We've said food is a universal language. But what does your personal food language say about you?
That's a good question. I never thought about food like that, like it's some kind of language.
It's unique to you, just like any language. Think about the flavors you love, the ingredients you choose, how you cook, the little rituals you have around food, the memories.
Okay, yeah, I get it.
It tells a story about you, your background, your experiences, what you like, who you are.
It's like food is a way to express yourself, to connect with other people. And it can change over time, like you were saying before, just like language changes.
Exactly. So take some time to think about your own food language. What does it say about you? What flavors do you love? What traditions make you happy? What food adventures are you still wanting to try?
I think I'll be thinking about that for a while. It's a really interesting idea. And I think it really sums up what we've been talking about this whole time. Food is so much more than just fuel. It's a part of who we are, where we're from, what matters to us.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive into food, I'll leave you with one last thought. I hope your plates are always full of delicious discoveries, joyful moments, and a deep appreciation for how powerful food can be. Thanks for joining us.